I sold 3 properties to keep my husband alive. The morning his transplant team called him a miracle, he was already in the hallway holding another woman's hand, telling her the wire had cleared. I wiped my face, fixed my smile, and walked straight to the chief surgeon's office. He had no idea I'd been 3 steps ahead of him for weeks. My name is Naomi. I'm 31, and until last spring, I really did believe my marriage was the steady thing in my life. I work as a project manager for a mid-sized civil engineering firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. My husband. I'll just call him my husband for now, because saying his name still makes my jaw lock. Ran a small commercial HVAC company we'd built together out of a leased garage off Independence Boulevard. 8 years of marriage. 1 kid, our son 6 years old, the kind of kid who hugs your knees when you walk in the door. When the cardiologist at Atrium told us my husband needed a heart transplant or he wouldn't see Easter, I didn't cry in front of him. I cried in the parking garage with my forehead on the steering wheel and a half-eaten granola bar in my lap. Then I drove home, opened a spreadsheet, and started calculating what we owned. Insurance was going to cover most of the surgery itself, but not all of it. The deductible alone was brutal, and the post-transplant medications, tacrolimus, mycophenolate, prednisone, the whole rejection prevention cocktail, those were going to run us thousands a month for life. Out-of-network specialists, the rehab facility his doctor recommended in Durham, the lost income while he couldn't work. I added it all up and the number had a comma in a place it shouldn't. We had 3 properties between us, the 4-bedroom in Myers Park we've been renovating, a condo near UNC Charlotte my mother-in-law had co-signed for, which we rented to grad students, and a small bungalow in Plaza Midwood my parents had left me when my dad passed, the one I'd kept paid off because it was the only thing in this world that was just mine. Sell them, I told the realtor. All 3. Fast. My husband's mother sat at her kitchen table and held my hand and said, "Naomi, honey, that's everything." I told her people are not everything that we have. People are everything that we have. People are everything that we are, and we earn the rest back. She kissed my forehead and called me a saint. I almost laughed because what I was scared. I closed on the Myers Park house in 9 days. Took a $100,000 haircut on the price for a cash buyer. The condo went a week later. After the mortgage payoff, there wasn't much left, but it was something. The Plaza Midwood bungalow was paid off free and clear, so I held it back. That was my floor. That was the thing I told myself I'd never touch unless we were truly out of options. The surgery happened on a Thursday. 12 hours. I sat in the family waiting room with my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law and watched the same CNN segment loop 4 times. When the chief of cardiothoracic surgery came out and said it went beautifully, my mother-in-law collapsed into a chair sobbing and my sister-in-law hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. I just slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor and let myself shake. He woke up Monday morning, pale, dry-lipped, eyes clear. I held the back of his hand because I was afraid to touch the IV side. He whispered my name. I told him he scared me. He said, "I know, I'm sorry." And I cried. The good kind. The kind that comes from a body finally letting go. The woman showed up Tuesday afternoon. I was rinsing out a plastic cup at the little sink in the corner of his room when I heard the door open behind me. I assumed it was the nurse. A perfume hit the air first, something French, something I'd smelled at a Nordstrom counter once and put back because it was $400. Then I heard her voice say his name, soft and proprietary, like she'd practiced it in the elevator. I turned around. She was tall, blonde, late 30s, dressed for a board meeting and not a hospital. She was holding a giant arrangement of stargazer lilies, which any nurse will tell you is a terrible idea on a transplant floor. She walked past me like I was a piece of furniture and put her hand directly on top of my husband's hand, and he did not pull away. I knew her by reputation only. Her name doesn't matter. She'd been his fiancée in college before me, the one who left him for an investment banker in Atlanta the summer before senior year. I'd seen exactly 2 photos of her in 8 years, and he'd never brought her up except once at a Christmas party when his cousin made a joke and he laughed too hard. I came as soon as I heard, she said. You shouldn't have, my mother-in-law said from the corner, in a voice I had never heard her use. My sister-in-law's hand found my elbow. My husband looked at the woman holding his hand and smiled. Not the polite smile he gave my coworkers, a real one. The one I used to think was mine. She told him not to worry about anything. She told him she'd already made calls, that there was a rehab facility in Asheville run by a friend of hers, that she could take care of everything. That phrase, take care of everything. As if I hadn't just liquidated my entire life to take care of everything for the last 3 weeks. I stood there holding the plastic cup. The water was running cold in my hand, and I didn't notice. She left after 20 minutes, kissed his forehead at the door, gave me a smile that was supposed to look gracious. My mother-in-law muttered something in Polish that I'm pretty sure was a curse. My sister-in-law squeezed my arm and said, Naomi, I'm so sorry. My husband closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. I walked out into the hallway to refill the cup with water that nobody was going to drink. By the nurse's station, I had to stop and put my hand flat against the wall because my knees weren't working right. I heard 2 scrub-clad nurses behind the counter. Low. That's the 2nd time this week. The wife knows? She's gotta. The wife always knows. Sad. She sold their houses, did you hear? Yeah, she sold their houses. I walked back to the room with my cup of water and a face that did not move. That night, I lay in the recliner next to his bed and listened to the heart monitor and tried to talk myself out of what I'd just seen. He was on a lot of medication. He was emotional. He was a man who'd just been opened from collarbone to sternum and given another person's heart. Of course he wasn't himself. Of course. But I have a thing I do when I'm trying to lie to myself. I notice it now, the way you notice a tick in someone you've known for years. I tell myself a soft story. Of course, honey. Of course. He didn't mean it. And the second I caught myself doing it, in that recliner under the buzzing fluorescent light, I felt something shift in my chest that wasn't fear. It was older than fear. The next morning, I told him I was running home for a shower. I wasn't. I went to a coffee shop on East Boulevard, ordered a cortado, and opened my laptop. I have his iCloud password because we share a family plan and he has zero imagination about passwords. I'm not proud of this. I'm just telling you what I did. I scrolled. There was an email folder labeled Storage. Inside it, a subfolder called Contracts, Miss. Inside that, 3 PDFs. The first was a personal loan agreement dated 4 months earlier, $300,000 against the equity in our company's warehouse. I'd never signed anything. I'd never even seen this. The second was the cap table for an LLC I'd never heard of, registered in Delaware, listing him as a 30% silent owner and a nominee shareholder I didn't recognize holding the rest. The third was a draft separation agreement, and I made myself read every line of it. Under its terms, I would walk away from our marriage with the contents of my closet, half the equity in the Plaza Midwood bungalow, and shared custody of our son on alternating weekends. Everything else, the company, the remaining assets, the future, was his. The draft was dated 6 weeks before his heart attack. I closed the laptop, finished my cortado, paid my check, and threw up in the parking lot behind a dumpster. Then I drove back to the hospital, and when he woke up, I held a straw to his lips and asked if his pain was a 4 or a 5. This is the part where I want you to understand something. I did not make a plan that day in the parking lot. I made it that night at home, after my son was asleep, sitting on the floor of the master bedroom closet with my back against the drywall. The plan came to me the way plans come to people who have run out of other options: complete, calm, and quiet. I needed 3 things: evidence I could use in court, a way to keep him from doing anything desperate while I built it, and a lawyer who specialized in hidden marital assets. I started with the lawyer because that's the bone of it. My college roommate is a partner at a family law firm in Raleigh, and she's the kind of friend you can call at 11 p.m. and not have to apologize. I told her everything in one breath. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she said, Naomi, listen carefully, do not confront him, do not move money, do not change a single password he might check, document everything. I'm putting you in touch with someone tomorrow. The someone was a senior partner downtown who'd handled cases for two NBA wives and a woman whose husband had hidden $7 million in shell companies in the Caymans. Her retainer was steep. I paid it from a personal checking account my husband didn't have visibility on. The one I'd kept since before we got married. The one with my maiden name still on the checks. She listened to me for 2 hours. She told me what evidence would matter and what wouldn't. She said the loan agreement was huge. She said the LLC was huge. She said the draft separation agreement was almost too good. It showed intent, and intent was the whole game in a fraudulent transfer case. She told me to keep my mouth shut, my smile wide, and a notebook hidden somewhere he'd never look. I bought a small moleskin and kept it inside an old maternity clothes box in the garage. He hadn't opened that box since 2018. Next, I needed a private investigator. My lawyer gave me a name, a former Mecklenburg County investigator who'd retired into private work. I'll call him Wade, because that wasn't his name, and he asked me not to use it anywhere. We met at a Panera in Valentina. He was 60-something, white mustache, ate his soup with both hands on the spoon. He listened to my story, asked 4 questions, and quoted me a number that would have made me flinch a year ago. I wrote him a check. Wade was worth every penny. Within 10 days, he had photographs of my husband and the woman entering a vacation rental in Blowing Rock, a property I later learned the LLC owned. He had cell tower records that placed them in the same locations 47 times in the previous year. He had a copy of the wire transfer that moved $50,000 from a personal account I didn't know existed into hers 3 days before his heart attack, with a memo line that read, "Loan repayment." He had bank statements showing the woman had been functionally bankrupt for 14 months and her credit cards had all been paid off in a 6-week stretch the previous fall. The same 6 weeks my husband had told me he was traveling for a Raleigh contract that, when I checked the company's books later, had never existed. Meanwhile, in the hospital, I was the ideal wife. I brought him broth from the place he liked. I read him the news. I changed the cool cloth on his forehead. I rearranged the get well cards on the windowsill so the ones from his cousins were in front. The woman came twice more that week, each time with a casserole or a thermos. I greeted her warmly. I asked after her dog. I let her hand him soup. I made tea for the 3 of us and didn't drink mine. Once, in the hallway, I overheard the chief surgeon, I'll call him Dr. M, talking to a colleague about my husband's case. He used the words remarkable recovery and then, lower, complicated home situation. I held my breath outside the door. The colleague said something I couldn't make out. Dr. M said his wife sold their houses to pay for this, and there's a woman in there now who isn't his wife. I waited until the colleague left, then I knocked. Dr. M is in his late 50s, thin, the kind of doctor who has actual handwriting and makes eye contact. He looked surprised to see me. He gestured to the chair. I closed the door behind me and sat down with my hands folded in my lap, the way my mother taught me to sit when I needed something from a teacher. Doctor, I said, I'm not going to waste your time. My husband's recovery requires absolute compliance with his medication protocol, yes. Skipping doses, double dosing, taking unprescribed supplements, these are all dangerous. Potentially fatal, yes. I have reason to believe my husband may not be fully cooperative with that protocol once he's home. I'm not asking you to do anything outside your professional duty. I'm asking you, as his attending, to document every conversation you have with him about his medication, to insist on lab work at every follow-up, to make it clear, on the chart, in writing, that any deviation is on him, in front of witnesses. He looked at me for a long moment. Mrs., he started, Naomi is fine. Naomi, are you afraid for your safety? I'd thought about that question for 2 days, because I'd known he might ask it. I'm afraid, I said, of being blamed for something I didn't do, and I'm afraid that any accident in my home, with him in it, will be assumed to be my fault. I would like the medical record to be unambiguous. He sat back. He said, That's a request I can fulfill without compromising anything. That is, in fact, my standard of care. Thank you. I'm not going to ask you what's going on. Thank you for that, too. I left his office with my hands shaking. He had not asked me for a single thing. He had not asked me for a single thing. He had not asked for money. He had not asked for a favor. He had simply said yes because what I'd asked him for was the floor of his job, and somewhere in the conversation we had both understood each other completely. The comments on the original story I'd been told about a friend's cousin had gone through something similar, which is part of why I knew what to look for. Those comments had said the donation thing felt off, and they were right. I never offered Dr. M a dime. I didn't need to. He was a good doctor and a careful man, and that was the whole transaction. My husband came home 11 days after surgery. The first night, he asked if I'd consider sleeping in the guest room. Just while I recover, the meds are making me restless. I said, of course. I moved my pillow and my book and my phone charger down the hall and closed the door behind me and stood in the dark of the guest room and took the first full breath I'd taken in 2 weeks. The next morning, I bought 4 small wireless cameras at a Best Buy in Pineville. I installed them in the kitchen, in his home office, in the garage, and over the medicine cabinet in our bathroom. The cameras streamed to a cloud account he didn't have access to. I told myself I was doing this because of what my lawyer had said about staging accidents. I told myself I was protecting both of us. Mostly I was protecting our son. I also did something my lawyer had suggested very carefully. I went to his pharmacy, refilled his prescriptions a day early on the family plan, and replaced every bottle in his medicine cabinet with the new ones. The old bottles, which he'd had unsupervised access to for 48 hours, I sealed in plastic bags and put in a locked file cabinet in the garage. If anything ever happened, the chain of custody would be on him, not on me. The next 4 weeks were the strangest of my life. I cooked his meals. I drove him to follow-ups. I sat next to him on the couch and watched college basketball. I held his hand in the doctor's office. I asked Dr. M in his presence the same question every visit. Doctor, I want to be sure I understand. If he were to skip a dose or take something not on this list, what would happen? And every visit, on the record, in front of the resident and the nurse, Dr. M would explain in clinical detail exactly what would happen. My husband sat through every one of those conversations with a face that grew tighter each time. He didn't know I had cameras. He didn't know I had a notebook. He didn't know about Wade or the Raleigh attorney or the moleskin in the maternity box. He thought I was the same wife who'd sold 3 houses for him without blinking, the wife he'd already mentally filed for divorce from. He thought I was easy. 3 weeks into his recovery, Wade called me on a burner I'd bought at a Walmart in Gastonia. They had a fight, he said. I have audio. I drove out to the Panera. He played me the recording on his laptop with his good headphones, both of us hunched over a table in the corner. The woman, furious. When was he going to file? When was he going to get her access to the LLC funds? She'd been carrying him on her credit cards. She was tired of waiting. My husband, exhausted. His wife was being weird. The doctor was being weird. He couldn't take chances right now. Just a couple more weeks. The woman, maybe he just needed to forget a dose or 2. Maybe he just needed a little setback. People would understand. People would feel sorry for him. His wife wouldn't dare push back if he was in the hospital again. They'd have time and sympathy and a clean line to file. My husband, are you out of your mind? The woman, you brought it up first. My husband, very quiet, I said at once. I was venting. Don't bring it up again. The woman, don't act like you're better than me. You're the one who, the recording cut. Wade looked at me. I sat very still. After a minute, I said, how clean is the audio? Clean enough, he said. Court clean, if it has to be. Okay, Naomi, yeah, I've been doing this 30 years. You need to file. Soon. I will. I'm waiting on one more thing. What? I want him to do it on camera. In our house. He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. The thing my lawyer had told me, the thing she had said 3 different times to make sure I heard it, was that intent was the case. We had documents, we had financials, we had the audio. What we didn't have, in a clean, evidentiary form, was him doing something stupid in a place I controlled. 2 days later, the woman bought potassium chloride and a loop diuretic at a CVS in Matthews, in cash, with a hat pulled low. Wade had a still photo from the parking lot security feed and a copy of the receipt. Potassium chloride in the wrong amounts will stop a transplant heart. A diuretic, taken with his current cocktail, will spike his potassium on its own. I called my lawyer. She said file Monday. I went home that Friday afternoon and made meatloaf, his mother's recipe. He came down to the kitchen for the first time in days, drawn by the smell. He sat at the counter and watched me chop onions. He looked tired in a way I almost felt sorry for. Almost? He said, Naomi, I've been thinking. We should talk about the future. I said, sure. After dinner, he took out his phone to text someone. From where I was standing, I could see his thumbs move. I didn't need to see the screen. The cameras would have it. After dinner, he excused himself to the office. 20 minutes later, he came back with a glass of water in his hand and a small folded paper towel I could see between his fingers. You should rest, he said. You've been doing too much. Let me get my own meds tonight. I smiled at him. I sighed. At him. I said, that's sweet. I already laid them out on the counter. They're right there. He looked at the counter. The bottles were lined up neat. He looked at the paper towel in his hand. He looked at me. I held his eyes. For maybe 4 seconds, my husband and I looked at each other across our kitchen island, and I watched something move behind his face. Something that wasn't love and wasn't even hate. Something more like a man recalculating. He set the paper towel on the counter. He took his pills with the water in his glass. He kissed the top of my head and went upstairs. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub, and breathed for 10 minutes. Then I bagged the paper towel, photographed it, labeled it with the date and time, and put it in the file cabinet in the garage with the others. Monday morning, my lawyer filed. He was served in our living room at 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday by a process server in a polo shirt. I was at my office. I'd asked her to do it that way on purpose. He called me 11 times in the first hour. I sent every call to voicemail. The 12th call I picked up. He said, Naomi, what is this? I said, it's exactly what it looks like. He said, we can talk about this. We can work this out, I said. Talk to your lawyer. Mine has the cameras. There was a silence so long I thought the call had dropped. He said, what cameras? I hung up. The next 2 months were the kind of paperwork hell that would bore you to read about. Depositions, forensic accountants, a motion to freeze the LLC, a subpoena for the woman's financial records that came back with so many red flags it triggered a separate IRS inquiry, the audio, the bank wire, the loan documents, the cap table, the camera footage of him reaching for the paper towel, the photograph of the CVS receipt, all of it landed on the table at mediation like stones. He folded inside of 20 minutes. I got the company. I got the recovered $300,000. I got the Plaza Midwood bungalow, which I'd never actually sold. I'd told him I had, and he hadn't asked to see paperwork because by then he was distracted by other plans. I got primary custody of our son with a generous visitation schedule for him, supervised for the first 6 months because of the medication question, after which the supervision could be lifted at the court's discretion. The woman was charged. Conspiracy and a couple of other things I let my lawyer handle. She took a plea. 3 years. My husband did not go to prison. There wasn't quite enough to charge him directly with the medication issue, and my lawyer told me, gently, that pursuing it further would mean my son sitting through a trial about whether his father had tried to kill his mother. I let it go. I let it go because of my son, and because I'd already won, and because there's a kind of victory that calls for a knife and a kind that calls for a door, and I knew which one this was. 6 weeks after the divorce was final, his body rejected the heart. I'm told he was non-compliant with his medications. I'm told he'd been drinking. I'm told the woman was no longer in a position to remind him of anything. He went into the hospital on a Sunday and he was gone by Wednesday morning. His mother called me from the ICU. I drove there. I held her hand in the family room. My sister-in-law put her head on my shoulder and we cried, the both of us, for a man who hadn't existed in a long time. I let our son say goodbye. I told him his daddy loved him very much because his daddy did, in the warped, cracked way some men love the people they're also planning to ruin. I did not go to the funeral. His mother understood. She came to my house the next weekend with a casserole and we sat on my porch and she said, "Naomi, I knew since the hospital. I'm so sorry I didn't say." I told her she didn't need to be sorry. I told her she was the only mother I had left and I wasn't losing her too. My son and I live in the Plaza Midwood bungalow now. I run the HVAC company myself with a partner I trust and we've doubled revenue in 18 months. My son is 8. He plays soccer on Saturdays. He has friends whose names I always forget. He asks about his father sometimes, and I tell him true things. The kind you can tell a child, that his dad worked hard, that his dad was sick, that his dad loved him. I don't tell him the rest. He'll ask, someday, and I'll figure out what to say then. I drive past Atrium sometimes on my way to a job site. I see the parking garage where I sat with my forehead on the wheel and a granola bar in my lap, and I don't recognize the woman who was inside that car. She was scared and she was lying to herself and she was about to lose everything she thought she was. She didn't lose it. She put it down. There's a difference. I'm not bitter and I'm not proud. I'm just here, in my own kitchen, in my own house, with my own son asleep down the hall, and the heat works because I fixed it myself last Tuesday with a part I billed to nobody. That's the ending. That's all of it. I think about that parking garage at Atrium more than I should. Forehead on the steering wheel, granola bar melting in my lap, a woman so scared of losing her husband that she was already counting which walls she'd sell the paint off. I was a good wife in that moment. I was also a woman who hadn't yet learned the difference between loving someone and disappearing into them, and I want to be honest with you about that, because I think a lot of women never get told the difference until it's too late. What I learned, sitting on the floor of a closet at midnight after I read those PDFs, is that betrayal almost never arrives as a single event. It arrives as a slow shift in the weight of things, and your job, if you want to keep yourself, is to notice the shift before everyone else does. My husband didn't decide to ruin me the night the woman walked into his hospital room. He'd been deciding it for months, in small accountings I missed because I was busy trusting him. Cause and effect doesn't always look like lightning. Sometimes it looks like a bank wire with a memo line. Sometimes it looks like a draft separation agreement saved in a folder labeled storage. The part I'm proudest of isn't that I won. It's that I didn't lie to myself once I saw it. I caught myself in that recliner, telling myself the soft story, "Of course, honey, of course," and I made myself stop. That was the whole turn. Everything that came after, the lawyer, Wade, Dr. M, the cameras, the paper towel on the counter, all of it was just the work that follows the decision to see clearly. The decision is the hard part. The work is the easy part, once your eyes are open. If I could go back and sit next to that woman in the parking garage, I wouldn't tell her to leave him. She wouldn't have listened, and she wasn't ready. And the version of her who could win was still being made by what was about to happen to her. I just tell her this. The love you give someone does not obligate them to be worthy of it, and the love you give someone does not obligate you to keep giving it after they've shown you who they are. Those are two different things. Hold them in two different hands. My son is going to grow up with a mother who knows the difference between a harbor and a hostage situation, and that's worth more to me than any house I sold. The bungalow my dad left me is the only address my son has ever really called home. He doesn't know yet that I almost gave it away. He doesn't need to. What he needs is a mother who can fix a heater, run a company, sleep with both eyes closed, and look him in the face and tell him that being kind and being a fool are not the same thing, even though the world will sometimes try to convince him they are. That's the inheritance I'm building. That's the lesson I had to bleed for. And it was, in the end, worth every drop.